This is Detroit. This is Detroit, and so is this. Detroit, like many cities across North America, used to look a lot different and used to host a lot more bikes. But also, like many cities, eventually embraced the car. Well, perhaps a bit harder than most, they put the pedal down and raced into a golden age of motordom until the eventual collapse that left the city a husk of its former self. While that might seem bleak, Detroit is now poised to become an urbanist and cycling hotspot, an urbanist phoenix rising from the ashes that I think deserves a lot more attention. My name is Nick, I talk about little things that move people, and I want to share with you a tour I took with Todd Scott of the Detroit Greenways Coalition so we can discover Detroit's history and the incredible opportunity to become the next urban utopia. That's a bit hyperbolic, but still, good things are coming. My optimism is probably born from my personal connection to the area. While I spent my formative years in London, Ontario, I actually spent my childhood in Essex County, just over the Detroit River. Motor City culture wasn't kept on one side of the border, it drove its way into Canada. My grandfather worked his whole life for GM, and even my dad still works for a parts manufacturer in Windsor to this day. And to me, it was also Motor City. Like many young men, I was a fan of cars, still am in many respects. It's easy to write off Detroit as an example of what not to do, but I feel like that's a bit reductive because it was, and I would argue still is, an important American cultural hub. I'll take Windsor over Detroit pizza any day, but it was the place we'd visit for the zoo, sports, especially hockey, which by the way, the Red Wings have a car tire in their logo, and the music. My first concert was the Backstreet Boys in the summer of '98 in Michigan, and yes, As Long As You Love Me is my go-to karaoke song. But that was only the first of many memories to be made, like Buddy Guy at the Fox Theater and Cold War Kids at St. Andrews Hall. However, those pale in comparison to the real golden age of Detroit music. Motown, an entire genre named after the city, one that eventually gave way to a particular style of rock that inspired Paul Stanley of Kiss to write Detroit Rock City, which is not only a nod with its high-energy foot-stomping chorus that reminds us of the good times, but rather poetically starts with a roaring engine and ends with the sounds of screeching tires and rending metal and glass, a tribute to a fan who died in a crash while on the way to one of their shows. It's perhaps too good of a metaphor for the era of the automobile in Detroit. While I may take the knowledge of the city's history for granted, I imagine many are unfamiliar with the story, so I'd like to take you down memory lane for a quick tour of Detroit's history. Located along the aptly named Detroit River is land which is the ancestral home of the Anishinaabe people. Their land was settled by French colonists and named Fort Detroit, prime fur trade real estate. It was subsequently surrendered to the British, which was then incorporated into the United States. And after a fire destroyed much of the city, Augustus B. Woodward devised a brand new plan which gave way to the distinctive radial street grid in the downtown core. The city developed like many others across the continent. People got around by foot, streetcar, horse, or by bicycle. That was until the automobile gained popularity. While the car wasn't born here, Henry Ford revolutionized its manufacturing. The introduction of the assembly line made automobiles more affordable than ever, and Detroit soon became the engine room of the American dream. And while most North American cities also embraced the car with open arms, there is probably no other place that so completely changed for the four wheels than Detroit. And it paid off. Detroit became the richest city in the world per capita, almost entirely due to the car industry. It was the Motor City, a shining example of American industry and its downtown trading blows with the likes of Chicago and New York. During World War II, it earned another nickname, the Arsenal of Democracy. Its factories pivoted to produce tanks, planes, and munitions, cementing the city's place at the center of the manufacturing war effort. It was also home to the very first modern highway, the Davison Freeway. And as the post-war boom kicked in, suburban malls and neighborhoods began pulling people away from the city. Worried about losing business, Detroit's leaders redesigned the city for cars. Highways were built to funnel commuters downtown, skyscrapers gave way to parking lots, entire neighborhoods, often black communities, were bulldozed for freeways, displacing families and tearing apart the city's social fabric, where a car became a necessity, not a choice. The car that built Detroit now made it easier for people to leave. And as the population shrank, so did tax revenue. City services collapsed, taxes rose, and the cycle continued. And then, as if scripted by irony itself, even the car industry, the one thing that Detroit had sacrificed so much for, began to falter. High gas prices made fuel-efficient Japanese cars more appealing, factories moved to places for cheap labor, and Detroit was left with a downtown built for machines, not people, an anti-place. And that's when the inevitable happened. The city went bankrupt, the largest municipality in the United States to do so. And while that sounds bleak, it was the turning point. Many people had hope. Where some saw blight and decay, some had a much more optimistic perspective. They saw opportunity. This is the one thing I want you to take away from this video, not just for Detroit, but for your city too. Opportunity is everywhere, and the people of Detroit have been taking advantage of it for the past decade to great effect. Empty lots turned into community gardens, unused parking lots turned into housing, and abandoned rail lines into beautiful greenways. Which brings us to the first place that Todd took me, the Dequindre Cut, a 2-mile-long rails-to-trails conversion that connects Mack Ave to the riverfront.
So back in the day, Detroit's riverfront was so busy that this railroad was at grade. It blocked the entire city off. So they forced the railroads to cut it. That's why it's called the Cut. I think it opened officially in 2009, 2010.
This is a prime example of seeing is believing, where folks get on board with the idea of walk-bike paths once they've experienced them in their community.
This trail, more than any other, switched Detroit's mindset on greenways. And even the city really wasn't all that on board with this project. They just kind of went along with it. And once it got done, everyone's like, oh. And then the residents were like, this needs to be longer. You need to connect it to Eastern Market. Yeah. That's how that next section came about. Beyond that, that's the Joe Louis Greenway, the 30-mile loop around the city. This was actually part of it.
The Joe Louis Greenway is the real deal and will be the crown jewel of Detroit's cycling network. The 27.5-mile Greenway is a planned loop around the city extending from the riverfront to Highland Park, Dearborn, and Hamtramck. It's a neat mosaic made up of separate trails to form one big loop. The Dequindre Cut, portions of the Detroit Riverwalk, as well as portions of the Iron Bell Trail and Southwest Greenway. When completed, will not only serve as an important connection of the city's cycling network, but as a place to spend time.
So is there an ETA on the Joe Louis Greenway?
No, because not all the funding's been secured. It's going to be substantially done by 2027 though. And the thought is, let's build some decent interim connections to make the loop complete, and then we'll figure out the rest. Because the one thing they've done is that they've not spared expense on routing, and so they've got some expensive stuff to build. So that means then they're investing in the park too, and redoing the park, and they're not taking the easy way out.
While there has been incredible progress, much still has to be done. We'll be hitting other portions of the Greenway as we go. From the Cut, we took a little detour that found us on a former street turned Greenway and a hint of opportunity in a city with too much parking.
So this never used to be here. This used to be a parking lot. So the city purchased it to make the connection to help get people to the river.
Which served its purpose, because that's exactly where we were going. This here is the Detroit Riverwalk.
It's not quite done, but when it's done, it'll be 5 miles. And it's bridge to bridge. So it's this MacArthur Bridge here to Belle Isle, all the way to the Ambassador Bridge.
And while it's yet to be completed, it has already come together quite nicely, with beautiful green spaces, parks, concessions, excellent places for walking and cycling, and there is also some history to be found here too.
This is interesting. This whole complex here was the Park Davis facility, which is the first movie made in Detroit, was a fire drill at the Park Davis building, and it showed 600 people on foot and 400 people on bikes.
We made it to the east end of the Riverwalk and crossed MacArthur Bridge onto Belle Isle. While the lanes here left something to be desired, there was a pretty neat piece of cycling history right on the island, the former Belle Isle Bicycle Pavilion.
This was built in 1899 for bicyclists. It was built for $10,000. At its opening, they had 5,000 people come out to celebrate. And they used to have bicycle rentals. They had a bicycle repair station. I think it's the most historic building of the golden age of bicycling.
Sadly, its designation was short-lived. Just a few years after opening, it was turned into the Athletic Pavilion. But as we continued through the park, I asked Todd what he thought was the watershed moment of Detroit's urbanist transformation.
And the mayor's not a bicyclist. He doesn't ride bikes. During the bankruptcy, Bloomberg Associates, which is former mayor Mike Bloomberg of New York City, his staff created a foundation that helps other cities around the world. And one day, Jeanette Sadak-Khan, she came here on a Wednesday at one of his staff meetings and gave a presentation on what she did in New York. The mayor stopped her apparently 10 seconds into her presentation, says, "Before you go any further, I'm in New York City. I step out of my hotel, You took away a lane of traffic for bikes. Cars were all backed up. Why'd you do that? And she says, well, actually the cars were backed up before. They're moving a little better than they were before. You know, New Yorkers are living longer. The sidewalks are safer. On the streets where we put bike lanes in, the businesses do better. I've never seen the mayor do a 180 faster. All of a sudden, he became a disciple of Jeanette Sada-Khan. Next thing, he calls a meeting with MDOT, all his city staff, and he says, you know, we have all these wide roads. What can we do to make them better for biking and walking? And where can we put in plazas? Where can we shut down roads? So we got to work.
This is a reminder to keep bringing the data, keep bringing the facts and how these changes benefit the community, because sometimes people, like Mayor Duggan, come around. Abandoned homes were demolished to reduce fire risk and crime, restoration of historic buildings, construction of denser housing, and of course, huge investments into the active transportation network. This has set the tone for the direction the city has been heading in for the past decade. We turn back towards the core of the city where Todd shared another sneak peek of his Detroit history bike tour.
Yeah, first car driven in Detroit was in 1896. It was Charles Brady King. He had a bicyclist following him, and the guy on the bike was Henry Ford. So Henry Ford was the first bicyclist to share the road with a car. Ford was a bicyclist. I got pictures of him with his bike, and then his first car was made with bike parts.
A sobering reminder that even the man lauded for his contribution to the car industry was also a cyclist, and that so much of our infrastructure is really only necessary for cars.
There's a claim that we had the first stop sign. I think it's largely BS. So what happened is the Detroit streets were so congested, and the rule was that at every intersection, you had to yield to the first person to the intersection or the person on your right. Problem is, if you go up a main street, every single intersection, you have to yield. So Detroit created stop streets. So stop signs were invented so cars could go faster. It got them going so fast that they had to invent the four-way stop as this, traffic calming. And that's why it makes no sense for bikes to follow them. Bikes never had stop signs. People say, motorists say, oh yeah, I got slowed up by a bike. I'm like, okay, let me tell you how many times I've been slowed up by a stoplight, stop sign, one-way street, going around a freeway. Those things didn't exist until you came about. You slow me down far more than I could ever slow you down.
That's a good springboard to take a look at all of the overbuilt and unused infrastructure that makes it so much more difficult to get around the city outside of a car. The days of a congested Detroit are no longer. At least that was the case on this particular day. Wide, overbuilt streets hosting just a fraction of what these roads were built for.
The reality is that Detroit is the most expensive city in the United States to own a car. Car ownership is the largest, most expensive thing in everyone's budget in Detroit, more than food or rent. It's not practical.
It's estimated that around 33% of Detroiters don't have a car. Considering the lackluster bus system, it often leaves people in food deserts and far from opportunities. Improvements to transit and active transportation couldn't come any sooner. But here we approach the ominous GM complex.
So that building was actually built by Ford. It was going to bring Detroit back. They built a city within a city. They boasted that you'd never have to leave the building to get anything. And they realized that was stupid. GM bought it. First thing they did was connect it to the city, made a $25 million investment to kick off the Riverwalk construction. So the tower in the middle is a hotel. The 4 towers around the outside used to be mostly GM and GM suppliers. And then there's 2 additional towers. GM has basically moved out, except for their corporate staff. There's talk that they might tear down portions of it now. And all this parking lots are slated to go away too and become mixed-use development.
If done right, this whole area could look completely different in a decade. You already see hints of what's to come in the surrounding area. We continued west, passing over a very welcome pedestrian and cycling bridge, eventually ending up at Riverside Park, where we got a great view of the 100-year-old Ambassador Bridge and the new bridge currently under construction, named after Canadian hockey player and Detroit Red Wings legend, Gordie Howe. And when I was planning my trip, I was curious to see if I could get from Windsor to Detroit on a bike or on foot, but it turns out that's a no. You would have to take a detour around Lake St. Clair because the Ambassador Bridge has been closed to bikes and pedestrians for decades. The only direct option was to drive or take the tunnel bus. However, the new bridge will have a cycling and walking path, opening the border to pedestrians and cyclists for the first time in over 30 years.
We're going to have people coming from all around the world. I keep telling people that. I don't think it's registered. This puts us on the map as a major cycling destination. Yeah. This with a 30-mile loop around the city. Yeah.
My glass half empty perspective is the fact that this isn't connecting the cores of Windsor and Detroit. I can't help but feel that this is mostly a car connection between Ontario's Highway 401 and the I-75 in Michigan. For now, core to core will require an extra 5 to 7 miles of riding, parts of which are along the yet-to-be-completed Joe Louis Greenway.
Nevertheless, the Gordie Howe Bridge is still a huge win, set to open in September of 2025. But from there, we took off back towards the city center, ending up in the Corktown neighborhood via the Southwest Greenway, which is another piece of the Joe Louis Greenway, which brought us here.
So this is a new lab, which is a mobility incubator. We actually have cargo bike manufacturers in the building. They're building bikes that can haul 750 pounds of goods.
So if you know the channel Propel, Chris Nolte, I think he works out of here. We even saw a cargo bike parked out front that I am almost certain was his. This is Michigan Central Station, a historic building that once saw over 200 trains leaving every day, but sadly has not seen one since 1988 before falling into disrepair. Though renovations have begun and there are apparently talks of putting rolling stock back on the rails in the future. From there, we headed back east through the northern part of the city before calling it a day. And I have to say, thanks to Todd for showing me how much opportunity there is in Detroit.
So this is actually going to go away. This freeway on-ramp, which splits the market. Keep Growing Detroit. This is their demonstration farm. It's a nonprofit that supports more than 1,000 community gardens throughout the city of Detroit. So this is going to become a new, I don't know how much, $100 million park, something like that. This street's going to have a two-way cycle track on that side of the road and a major road diet. This lower area is all going to be like public event space. And then behind it, they're going to do like a mobility theme park. And they're going to extend that Southwest Greenway right to it.
The transformation is well underway, and people are coming back to the city. The population has risen for the first time since 1957. However, there is still a lot of work to be done. Cycling infrastructure in the core of the city is lacking, and paired with the geofenced turtle speeds of a Lime scooter makes for a very unpleasant experience. Highways still scar the city with very little action on removal. Public transit needs a huge lift, as Detroit still ranks very low on the list of cities to live car-free. We have to be real. This is work. It's not going to happen overnight. This will take a generation of pushing for better, but the ball is rolling and the momentum is only building. I have high hopes for Detroit and believe it will not only climb the ranks of livable cities in the United States, it will become a shining example of how we can rebuild our communities. And perhaps in the future, we'll see folks wondering whether or not they can make their cities better. And people will say, Detroit did it. Why can't we?